We're still going on in this series on what's realistic recovery. What does it look like? In the last couple of weeks, we've switched to a realistic recovery as far as the attitudes that I need in order to make it. So we talked about commitment. Last week we talked about you got to start to become responsible and quit blaming. That has to be part of your attitude. And tonight I want to come to another key attitude for people if they're ever going to make it, and that is you need courage. And I want to explain that because it is so important, but it is misunderstood. So let me just kind of give you a setting for it this way. I've been working at addictions counseling for 15 years. And I would say that dealing with your addiction and with your trauma is one of the most difficult paths that any person has to walk. And it is there are all kinds of obstacles, all kinds of difficulties. And I don't see people walk that path unless they have courage. It is a key part because what you're saying is, I'm willing to tackle that path. I'm willing to take the risks in order to get clean and sober and to get healthy and deal with my trauma. It's going to be scary, I know that, but I am willing to do that. And so that is courage. And what I have found and why I want to talk about it is a lot of people coming out of complex trauma begin to realize how much fear has dominated their life. And they really begin to see that they've been, in many ways, controlled by fear, usually at a subconscious level, but it has been in control. And they go, I've got so much fear that I'm now aware of. How then can I have courage when I've got so much fear? And so the first thing I want you to understand is that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing in the midst of fear. Courage is being full of fear, but not giving into that fear, but choosing to do what you need to do even though you're afraid. And that is what recovery often will involve if you're going to make it. So your fear's still going to be there, but you're going to choose to walk into that fear, do what you know you should do instead of fight, flight, or freeze. And as you do that repeatedly, your fear becomes less and less. And we'll explain that as we go along. But let me start by just laying out some stuff around fear so that you get a fuller understanding of it. So fear was actually designed to be a gift. It was designed to be a very good, necessary, important system in us. And so it was designed to come into play whenever you faced a situation that was dangerous. It alerted you to the fact that there was danger. So fear is concerned all about your safety. That is what it is about. And so what it would do when you faced a situation or a problem where you might get hurt or you might not be able to handle it, it might be too much for you, fear would alert you. And now here's where the design comes in, and then you're going to see how complex trauma messes all of that up. Fear alerts you, there's a problem here, you could get hurt. So you stop and you go, do I have the tools for this? If so, what tools do I need to apply? And you apply them because fear made you alert that you need to bring out some tools. Or if it made you alert there's a problem here and you go, I don't have tools, then you go, what do I need to learn? And so I'm going to learn these tools and then I am going to handle this fear. And once you've resolved it, and that's the key word, you resolve it by the use of the right tools, fear disappears. You go back to a life where you live out of a place of love and kindness, not fear, and you have meaningful relationships and a meaningful life. Now, the problem then becomes, what happens to the person who's in a dangerous situation and they can't resolve it? So they get the fear that alerts them you're in danger. They try to resolve it, but they don't have the tools. Nobody teaches them the tools, so it remains unresolved, which means fear continues and it continues and it continues. And then what begins to happen is when fear is not resolvable, your brain goes, we only have one other option: fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the only tools that we know, so you go into survival mode. So the danger or the problem of complex trauma is a person lives in danger without the ability to resolve it. And as a result of that, they live in constant fear, usually at a subconscious level, but it's there. And so fear becomes the controlling emotion in their life. So what was once a good system, fear, alert you to danger, solve it, fear disappears. Now fear all the time, it messes your life up. It's no longer a good system. It's what we call a maladaptive system. It now sets you up for a lot of bad decisions when fear is in control. So that is what has happened if you're from complex trauma. Now let me take that a little bit further. Fear then is what happens when I don't have resources to handle a problem. So if I confront something and I don't have tools or support, I know I don't have the resources, so fear kicks in, and now I have this problem. So it's all about lack of resources. So in complex trauma, you didn't have the resources, fear couldn't be resolved, and on you go with fear. What is designed to happen is courage says, I'm going to learn the tools. Now I'm going to face the same situation. Fear's going to come up and say, oh, you've always failed at this. You've never had the tools. And you go, whoa, I have the tools now. But fear says, oh, you might get hurt. And you go, no, courage. I'm going to walk into that with the tools and support I have and resolve this situation for the first time. Now you can feel that's scary. Because all your life you've never been able to resolve it. And now you're saying, I think I got the tools. I've identified what's causing the fear. Courage now is going to walk into that and apply the tools. And that is what recovery is about. And it is a very scary thing for people brand new in recovery, but it takes courage to walk into that. So follow again. The idea of courage is not that you never feel fear. The idea of courage is that you're going to be full of fear, but you're going to choose to not go to fight, flight, but to use tools and operate in the face of that fear and make good decisions. So fear is acting the right way, or courage is acting the right way when you're full of fear. Or in other words, courage is no longer letting fear run my life, because that's what it's been doing. And so to keep allowing fear to run my life is really to become a prisoner of fear. And many of you understand that. Now, let me make another little distinction for you. I think a lot of people, they understand that fear is a powerful emotion. And so they want courage to be an emotion that overpowers the fear. But you realize courage isn't necessarily an emotion. It's a choice. It is a choice to operate a certain way regardless of what I'm feeling. So it's not trying to muster up an emotion. It is making a decision to act. And that is really important. Take courage out of the emotion realm and put it into the choice realm. Another way to say all of that is fear is about your limbic brain. And if you've been coming to Finding Freedom, you go, here we go again. Limbic brain. Courage is operating out of your cerebral cortex. And so what you're doing is your limbic brain is full of fear. And courage says, I'm not going to allow my limbic brain to run me. I am going to operate out of my cortex, even though my limbic brain is jumping up and down and screaming. I am going to operate out of my cortex. And that is really hard, but that's what it boils down to. Another way to say that, your limbic brain when it's full of fear, its concern is not what's good for me 5 years from now. Its concern is, what do I got to do right now to be safe? I don't care if it's a bad decision in 5 years. I just want to be safe right now. So it gets you super focused on instant protection. And what your cortex says, you know what? I've listened to you, limbic brain, for a lot of years, and you've kept me safe in the moment. But boy, you've created a lot of negative consequences long term. I'm not going to let you run me anymore. I now am going to choose what I have thought through carefully, and now I know is a wise decision. So that's what courage does. It fights against that limbic brain and the fear element. So that's why I say courage is essential for dealing with complex trauma. Complex trauma is all about fear unresolved. Courage says, let's deal with this stuff. Let's get the tools. Let's get a support network. But we got to stop living by fear. It's destroying relationships. It's destroying me. It's no longer okay. Part of your brain doesn't like to hear that, but that's what you're doing. Now, there's one other challenge I want to give you with this. When your limbic brain gets triggered by fear, it does this weird thing where you feel like a child again. And it takes you back to feeling like you don't have resources. You don't have tools. You can't handle this problem. It feels too big, too overwhelming. You feel helpless and powerless. Be aware of that, because once fear gets triggered, part of what your cerebral cortex is saying is that's a lie. I'm not a child again. I'm not without resources and tools now. Things are different. So your cerebral cortex is confronting lies as well as planning how to act. And that is very important. Now let me just get you to think about courage in recovery, because you might not have really given this a lot of thought. But here's why courage is needed. And I've only given a little bit of a list of things that you're going to have to face. We've pointed out that about 80% of addicts were introverted, shy, sensitive children. Many of you have gone to meetings and stuff and you go, I'm going to sit in the back and not talk to anybody. I will not initiate a conversation. The only time I will have a conversation is if somebody else initiates it with me. And then what will happen is you sit in the back, nobody's talking to you, now you're mad at everybody and you get negative. And you go, this is a dumb meeting, I'm going somewhere else. But you go somewhere else with the same mindset. I'm sitting in the back and I'm sitting there sending out all kinds of vibes, don't come close. And then mad when people don't come close. So what is recovery? It is saying, I got to start building some relationships, which means I got to overcome my fear, my shyness, my fearness of initiating a conversation, my fear of talking to people. Wow, that's scary. And so that is a big part of recovery. Am I going to let my fear of people and talking keep me isolated? I know where that road takes me and it's not pretty. So I have to confront that fear. And so what I spend time with people doing is this. Okay, let's get some basic tools. How about, what are you going to ask them if you go up to initiate a conversation with somebody? Are you going to go, when's the last time you had sex? No, probably not a good idea. What would be a good first question? And they go, oh, I don't know. Well, it's minus 30. You can talk about the weather. Or you can say, how long have you been clean? And you give them little questions that they can ask. And I say, you don't have to stay there for half an hour. You can ask a couple questions, say thank you, and move on. And you give them a few tools. And then what I watch happen is the next week, in fear and trembling, they're shaking. They go up to somebody and they say, hi, I'm Tim, and I just wanted to say hi to you and ask a couple questions. And they come back and they're all pumped. I did it. I did it. And it didn't kill me and nobody hated me because of it. And all of the fears that were there get put to bed. That's recovery. It's changing. Then the next one is you've been raised in complex trauma, never be a burden. But now you're struggling and you go, I need to talk to somebody. I need to ask somebody for help. Oh, I can't do that. Because then they'll think I'm too needy. Then they'll judge me. Then they'll look down on me. And so your fear keeps you from asking for help when you need to ask for help. So what does courage say? I got to ask for help. Even though it might make me feel a bit shamed and embarrassed, and I might have all kinds of thoughts afterwards saying, oh, they're probably thinking all these crazy things about you, but I got to do it. Courage. And then you're going to get somebody coming up, will you be my free taxi service and drive me all over the city? Or you be my free cigarette provider? And you do it because you want to be nice, but then you realize I'm afraid to say no. And if I'm ever going to make it in recovery, I got to learn to say no. And so the next time you're all prepared, I know this person's going to come and ask me for a ride, and I got to say no. And you can't sleep that night, and you're all sweaty the next day, and you're pacing, and they come up to you, and you go, no. And then you go, wow, I stood up for myself. That's courage. So every aspect of recovery requires you to do something that brings up a fear. And that fear can take you to say, okay, dumb idea, I'm not going to go there. Or you can say, no, I got to go there. I got to fight for my recovery. I got to fight for my survival. So courage, please, walk me past these fears. And then at some point, somebody's going to say, would you share your story? And you both die on the spot. And then you agree to do a 5-minute thing. And I laugh all the time because people say, okay, I'll do 5 minutes. And they write notes and they get up there and their legs are shaking and they go on for 40 minutes. And you can't shut them up. They don't know where the stop button is once they get started. And then you go, you know what? I need to learn a new habit besides drinking and using. So what new hobby? Maybe I should take up dancing. Oh no, I'd look so stupid. Maybe I should take up guitar. So you go to guitar and you didn't learn all the chords in 5 minutes and you go, this is dumb, this is useless, I'll never get it, and you quit. And then you realize that's fear talking again. I got to fight through that. I got to be willing to do stuff that I've never done before, even though it's going to have a learning curve and I'm not going to get it instantly. Courage. And then you're going to realize I got some secrets here that are killing me. They're keeping me sick. I got to share that with somebody. And now you got another 2 nights without sleep worrying about who you're going to tell, and you got to tell it. That's fear. And courage says, this has got to change. If I'm going to get healthy, I got to bring this crap into the light and get some help for it. And that's scary. But you walk into that and you do it, and then you go, am I ever glad I did? And you learn the tools as you go. Now the next and the final one I'll give you is this. You come into recovery and you learn I made a mess of my life. I'm in debt, I got legal troubles, I got kid troubles, I got CFS troubles, I got health troubles, I got CRA, income tax, wanting all my income taxes done. And you go, oh, crazy. Stick my head in the sand again and maybe it'll all go away. And then you go, you know what? I got to face this stuff one thing at a time. It scares me to death. I don't want to do it. I'm afraid. My brain goes to worst case scenario, but I have to do it. And you have courage. So recovery, I hope you get it now, requires courage. It requires doing what you know you need to do, even though your heart is full of fear. So let me give you just a couple very practical things. How do I do this? So when you face a problem, so let's say you got to get your income tax done and you haven't done it for 10 years. And it scares you to death. So you go, who do I need to talk to find out what to do? And you learn the tools. And you go, do I need to ask for help? Do I need to get somebody to do it for me? How do I go about this? And you figure it out step by step, then you begin to do it. That's how you begin to deal with it. And the goal is I'm going to deal with it to resolve it. Because once it's resolved, then I don't have to worry about it anymore. If I don't resolve it, it will continue to cause me anxiety. So what I want you to understand is that in the early days, you're probably going to need a lot of support and help to learn the tools. And sometimes you need a person to go with you because you're going to get tongue-tied and you're going to freeze and not know what to say and do. So that's okay. You can't usually do it alone. Then you got to begin to realize all those lies that say this is too big a problem. The lies that go to worst case scenario. What's the point? All of that you start confronting and you address that and replace it with truth. Many people find the spiritual gives a lot of support as far as a resource to face their fears and their problems. And that might work for you as well. I think one of the hardest parts of dealing with fear is that moment when your fear gets triggered. Your fear gets triggered and you escalate. And you're in panic mode. And what happens in panic mode is cortisol pumps in your brain and you stop thinking rationally. And all of a sudden you get really distorted. And so a key part of dealing with fear with courage is learning to de-escalate so that you can think it through and think clearly. Okay, I want to give you one more tool that I want you to think about. Complex trauma said this: problems lead to getting hurt. Okay? So I will avoid problems, so therefore I will then avoid being hurt. Now what happens from that is you go into recovery saying, I never can be hurt. And what you think of is childhood is where you were hurt, but nobody helped you grow through the hurt. The hurt never turned into a good thing. It always just was a bad thing. And so it's easy to come into recovery and you say, I've got courage to face my fears, but I'm never going to get hurt. That doesn't work. So this is where it gets tricky. I don't want you to go out from here and say, Tim said, don't be afraid of getting hurt, so I'm going to jump into bed with the next abusive narcissist. You got to use your brain and avoid obvious hurts and avoid situations that you know you have a track record of hurting yourself. But what I want you to understand is this: you can get into some relationships that are good and you're going to get hurt in little ways. That doesn't mean you should run, because now you can learn from that and a good can come out of that. So you begin to change your perspective that my highest priority is not getting hurt, period. I still have a priority to not get hurt unnecessarily, but I will put myself in situations where I might get hurt, but I have the tools to deal with it now. And I can turn that into a growth thing. Okay, now I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to play the piano for you. Okay. There we go. So that right there is this. That's your G, your C chord, okay? Now, what I want you to think about is this. There you go. Isn't that talented? There you go. There you go. Okay. I drove my mom almost to insanity by my resistance in doing piano practices. Here's what I want you to see. Your dad is C, okay? So what you learn in complex trauma, if you want a chord without discord, everybody has to harmonize with dad. You follow that? Okay. So now you come into recovery and you're going to change. You want to know what just happened? You are no longer harmonizing with Dad. You realize that that takes courage to stick on your note? Because all your family is going to say you're causing problems. You're not being a very good kid. Look at all the trouble you're causing in the family. Go back to your old note where it harmonizes. You're creating discord. It takes courage to say, I'm not leaving my note. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find people who harmonize with my note. So now I'm going to create a new chord that is a beautiful harmony. So I'm playing the same note. I just got new people around that note. And so the courage of recovery, there you go, that's your illustration. The courage of recovery is to say, I'm no longer going to harmonize with sick people. I will be discordant with sick people, but I'm not just going to stop there. I'm going to find people who are healthy that now I can harmonize with. And that is what recovery is about, and it takes a lot of courage. I was trying to think, what would be a great Bible story on courage? And I didn't have to think a whole lot of time. There's a bunch of different Bible stories that I could go to, but there's one that is personally one of my favorites, and it's one of those ones that you don't appreciate unless you understand the culture that was part of that time. Then it just kind of blows you away. So it's the story of a woman named Ruth. We mentioned her a couple weeks ago around Christmas. She's one of the women that are in the genealogy of Jesus, and she's the one that Lot had sex with his daughters, and then they had a son. One of them had a son called Moab, and Ruth was from Moab. So that's that part of the story. But it begins with a couple who lived in Israel named Naomi and Elimelech. They were farmers in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem, if you're wondering, means house of bread. So it's the best farm country in that country. There was a famine. And they hung in there as long as they could. They sold pretty much everything. And no rain came year after year. And so eventually they said, we got to leave. We hear there's opportunities in Moab. So they packed everything up with their two boys, and they moved to Moab. They got there. We don't know what he did, the husband, as far as work. The boys got older. Both of them got married. One of them married this Moab girl named Ruth. Then, as if the famine and having to move to a strange country wasn't bad enough, Elimelech dies. The husband's gone. Now that hurt, but in that culture, both the sons were old enough they could provide. And then over a period of time, both sons die. So Naomi, she lost her country, she lost her husband, she lost her children. So she is one hurting woman. She decides, I got to go back to Israel. I hear that it's okay, the rains have come. I need to go back. But she goes back and she says to some of her old friends, don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi meant pleasant. She said, call me Mara. And that's bitter. And what she's saying is this: I'm mad at God. I'm mad at the world. I have become one angry, bitter person. And in her thinking, it was because God's been bitter towards me. Because life's given me a raw deal and been bitter to me. So I feel justified in being bitter. Now, when she had gone back, she wanted to go alone, but Ruth saw her mother-in-law, an older woman who wouldn't be able to provide for herself without a man. And so she said, I want to go with you. And so Naomi tried to object and stop her. And she said, I'm going with you. Now, can you imagine? Ruth would have been in her 20s, and you're going back now to a strange country with a crotchety, bitter old lady. Sign up for that. So that's courage number one. But then you get back there and there's a problem. They don't have food. They don't own anything. They can't get jobs because women didn't work. How is she going to provide? So they get back there just at harvest time. And that was one of the times when a woman could get a job. So there are two areas where women could work. Number one, become a prostitute. And number two, glean the fields. And what gleaning meant was, as the men who were harvesting went along, you would follow behind them and pick up any little pieces that they left, they didn't get. And it was a back-breaking job, number one. At the end of the day, you would hardly have picked up enough grain to make one little loaf of bread. So you worked all day in the hot sun, bent over, picking up stray little pieces of grain, only to get enough for a loaf of bread. So that's how hard it was. And she had to do it because Naomi was too old, and so she does it. Now there was another problem, another huge risk. When women went to glean, that meant they were poor. That meant they didn't have a husband or a man to take care of them. So they were now seen as somebody that they could be a predator of. So men would often, the workers, they would get a woman gleaning and they would take her and rape her. So that was a common experience for women gleaning without the protection of a man, is they became victims of a lot of very crazy men. So here is Ruth saying, I need to provide. Naomi can't provide. We don't have any men in our life. I will go to the field. I will take this risk. To me, that is a massive amount of courage. Now, the next issue with that was this. The person that was the farmer that owned that field, he could say, you can't glean in my field. And they would say that to foreign women. And so Ruth then had to face an uphill battle. If I'm going to provide, I'm going to risk getting raped. I'm going to risk having no said to me, all kinds of negative things that would have been easy to say, this is too hard, too difficult, too scary. I'm not even going to try. But she does. Now that takes us to the next issue. She goes and she reaps, and it just so happens, we're told, that a guy named Boaz owns the field. She didn't know didn't know who Boaz was. She just picked the field and went to it. And it just so happens that Boaz is a distant relative of Naomi. And he immediately wants to help. So that night after the gleaning is done, he calls Ruth over, and I'm sure Ruth got all afraid. And he said, here. And he gives her a whole bunch of grain for free. And so Ruth goes home with bags of grain, and Naomi's going, how did you get that? I expect you to come home with a little wee bit. And she says, I don't know, this guy named Boaz was really nice. And he gave, and Naomi goes, what? And guess what she starts to figure out? God hasn't forgotten me. God just provided. Is that a coincidence? Is that odd, or is it God? And she all of a sudden begins to realize, God's not bitter at me. I'm just bitter at God. God still cares about me and is committed to help me. That was a huge breakthrough. So that gave Naomi hope. Now that was important because the next thing was, harvest only lasted 8 weeks. So they were going to have bread for 8 weeks, but then what? What was Ruth supposed to do then? So Naomi gets this idea, and this is the part that just blows my mind. And it's like this. The end of harvest, at the end of each day, there was going to be this, they had to beat the grain down to get all the chaff separated from the grain. And then they'd throw it up at the top of a hill where it was windiest. They'd throw it up in the air and the wind would blow the chaff away and all the grain would fall. So that was called threshing. And what they would do was have these huge threshing parties where all the farmers would come together and they would make a big celebration out of it, a banquet, all kinds of wine and celebrating. So what Naomi does is says, we're going to do something on the night of the threshing party. So I got to read it to you and then I'll explain it. So one day Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you. Marriage, okay? Just in case you didn't know what she's thinking about. So that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young woman. Tonight, he will be winnowing or barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath, put on perfume, dress in your nicest clothes, go to the threshing floor. Don't let Boaz see you until he's finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down there and he will tell you what to do. Now let me explain that. Do you know what it means to uncover his feet? You go and propose marriage to Boaz. Now that's going to take guts. Now you got to think about that. Boaz was an older man. Ruth was a young girl. I'm pretty sure he goes, what do I want to do with that old man? I'm not marrying some old man. Now I'm sure Boaz was saying, hubba hubba, I like a 20-some-year-old. But Ruth is being asked to go and propose marriage to a man twice her age. So that's a big issue. But here's what I want you to understand. So you just got to put yourself here to feel this, okay? So she says, I want you to bath and perfume. So make yourself smell gorgeous. Then get your best clothes. And basically what she's saying is dress up like a bride. Bath, perfume, dress up like a bride. Cover yourself. Now, you got to sneak through the streets at night to get to the threshing hill. Make sure nobody sees you, because if they see or smell you coming and see you all dressed up like that, they're going to assume things and you could be in trouble. So you got to be super sneaky here. So you can just see Ruth running from bush to bush, peeking out, waiting, running to the next place. And her heart's just going crazy. Okay? Then you got to get then to the threshing floor. Get there early. Now you got to go into hiding and figure out where Boaz is, watch him, and then wait and go and watch where he lies down to sleep, because that's what they do. So that would mean Ruth has to find a bunch of bushes, hide in there, probably for a couple hours, waiting until everybody's done threshing. Now, if a guy found her there, or if somebody smelled her coming and goes, what's going on here? That could be huge problems. They could bring her out. They could abuse her in all kinds of ways. So she's got to be quietly hiding for several hours, waiting for all the threshing to be done. Then she's got to watch where Boaz lies down. Now she's got to wait for everybody to go to sleep. Because she doesn't want to now sneak out and have somebody wake up or sit up. She got to wait till she hears lots of snoring going on. Then she's got to sneak up, and Boaz would have a blanket on him to keep warm. And she's going to take the bottom of the blanket and lift it up so his feet are exposed. And the point is he's going to get cold feet and wake up. But then she takes the blanket and lifts it off his feet, and then she lies down perpendicular so that she's kind of half touching his feet. So then he doesn't just get cold feet, he feels something and he wakes up, and what's going on here? And he sees a woman dressed up at his feet. And then he realizes she's proposing. Talk about a nighttime heart attack, nightmare, whatever you want to call it, or the best dream ever, who knows? But can you imagine how scary that would be for Ruth? That just blows my mind. I don't know that I would have the courage to do that. But Ruth realized this. If I don't do this, Naomi and I will starve to death. If I don't do this, we will never survive. This is my only option for long-term care for the rest of my life. So even though I am scared to death, I am going to carry out this plan to the end. And she does it. And guess what Boaz says? Yes, I will marry you. And it worked out. Now they had to go through a few little things, but I want you to see one other piece. When you study the Bible, much of the Bible there's a message in how it's written. And as you come to the book of Ruth, you find that there's an introduction and a conclusion. Okay? That's normal in books even today. But then you look at it, and there's exactly 71 words in the introduction and exactly 71 words in the conclusion. And you go, okay, that I think is on purpose. And then you study a little bit further because they're drawing your attention to notice the 71 words and the 71 words. And you find out that at the end of the introduction, Naomi says, I left full and I come back empty. In other words, I went from full to empty. You want to know what she says in the conclusion? I was empty and God made me full. So it's a story of a woman who had it all, lost it all, got it back. But what is important to understand is this. She lost it all. She thought she had everything, lost it all, became a bitter, angry woman. Sound familiar? Many addicts have lost it all. But God says, I want to give you it back, but even more. Do you want to know what he gave her? I'm going to make you the great-great-great-grandmother of King David and then Jesus. So I am going to give you, by emptying you, I'm going to fill you up with all that you had before, plus the greatest privilege a woman could have to be the ancestor of King David and Jesus. But how did she get full again? A young 20-some-year-old woman had the courage to face her fear and do what needed to be done, and that's what brought her full again. It wasn't just, okay, God, fill me up, I'm going to sit on the couch. It was, I'm scared to death, God. I know what I need to do, but I don't want to do it, and it seems too hard, and I'm full of fear, but I'll do it anyways. And then she got full again. And that, to me, is recovery. You've had it all, lost it. And now, many of you were bitter for a long time, full of anger and resentment. And what you find in this story is God doesn't want to just empty you and leave you there. He wants to empty you so he can give you something better. But in order for you to get that something better, it takes a courage that faces a whole lot of fear and does it, and then God fills you back up. So there you have the beautiful story of Ruth. Now, you'll never be able to read that book the same way again.